If you're like me, then you've been incredibly excited with what's been happening in news lately with UFOs. Month after month, there have been various stories covering the topic, with many reports covering congressional hearings, Pentagon programs, and even the occasional close encounter story. Of course, one of the most exciting pieces of news recently came after Newsnation aired a full-length interview with whistleblower David Grush. For those of you who may not know, David Grush was a former intelligence officer who was part of the program named ARROW, or All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, who was tasked to study the UFO/UAP phenomenon at the Pentagon. Now, it is important to note that David Grush is seen as a credible individual whose claims are currently being taken seriously by members of Congress. In the interview he did with Newsnation, David Grush revealed that not only has the US government been covering up and studying UFOs for over 90 years, he said that the first retrieval was not made in 1947 in Roswell like many in the UFO community believed, but was actually made in 1933 in Magenta, Italy, in which a UFO either crashed or perhaps even landed. There, the Italian government, which was under the fascist rule of Mussolini at the time, retrieved the craft and stored it in a hangar. Years later, after the war had ended in 1945, the Vatican, under Pope Pius XII, got involved and contacted the US, which quickly came and took the UFO. Now, this story of an earlier retrieval made in Italy had already been circulating in the UFO community for quite some time. In fact, it can be traced back to a journalist named Roberto Pinotti. The story goes that in 1986, he received some documents through the mail from an anonymous source containing notes and telegrams, with some of those documents dating back to 1936. In those documents, it tells of the same story with the date given for the crash being April the 11th, 1933. The documents also tell of a special program called the Gabinetto RS/33, RS being an acronym for Ricerche Speciali, or Special Research. This secret program was put together by Mussolini and his cabinet ministers, with the head of the program being Guglielmo Marconi. Guglielmo Marconi was an Italian inventor and electrical engineer known for his creation of practical radio wave-based wireless telegraph systems, which actually won him the Nobel Prize in 1909. Suffice to say, this man was indeed a genius. The documents reveal that when the crash happened in 1933, Mussolini thought that it might have been either French, British, or a German secret weapon. However, the head of the Gabinetto, Guglielmo Marconi, believed it was extraterrestrial in nature. In those documents, there were also notes that described some of the UFOs that were seen flying over Italy at the time, one of which was a correspondence between a secret agent named Andrea and Varbrini. In the note, it says, "It was observed in the morning. It was a metallic disc, polished and reflecting light, with a length of 10 or 12 meters. 2 fighter aircraft from a nearby Air Force base took off, but were not able to reach it even traveling at 130 kilometers an hour. It didn't emit any sound, which would lead one to consider an aerostrat, but nobody knows of balloons that can fly faster than the wind. I know for sure that it was seen by other pilots. The report arrived in the hands of Ciano, Mussolini's son-in-law, and Italy's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Then, after approximately an hour and after flying over Mestre, it was seen as a sort of metallic tube, gray or slate in color." In these notes, Andrea draws the UFOs that were seen. The first UFO was described as a torpedo with windows and alternating lights. The second craft was described as a more classic description of a UFO, 2 hats put together. They were wide, round, with the dome in the center metallic, and followed the torpedo without changing their relative positions. What's incredibly interesting about this is that the description is that of a classic UFO. This was years before we got the sighting by Kenneth Arnold in 1947 and his sighting of the flying saucer he encountered. Now, these sightings would keep on continuing for years to come. And in fact, one of the most fascinating and terrifying encounters would come years later in 2004, in which a UFO was not only seen, but would act in a hostile manner against the Italian military. In 2004, Various fires were reported all over the town of Caneto de Carnia in Sicily. The fires were found to be linked to electrical units that would spontaneously catch fire. Some of these units would be televisions, various kitchen appliances, fuse boxes, electric car doors, and more. Upon learning this, the townspeople began to suspect that maybe electrical grid system was to blame. However, upon inspection, they found no issue with the electrical grid. The fires continued. Entire houses burned to the ground. Eventually, even people would be harmed, with having strange burn marks on their arms. Scared, and with the majority of the town being Catholic, they began to speculate that maybe even the devil himself was at work. Eventually, the Italian military would have to get involved, and what they would find would make things even stranger. Upon investigation, the military would find an electromagnetic signal that could be traced to the bottom of the ocean off the island's coast. What is interesting to note is that there were reports of strange lights that were seen above the open sea. The military found out that the electromagnetic signal would also be responsible for the fire set around the town. Once the military could triangulate the signal, they sent out a helicopter on a secret mission to investigate. This is where things get spookier and a bit terrifying. At this point, a UFO is seen following the helicopter as if it knew where it was going and what its intentions were. Then, once the UFO was about 100 meters behind the helicopter, it shot out what is described as an energy beam or ray at the rear rotor. The damage was so severe that the helicopter had to take an emergency landing. Now, it is really important to note that militaries around the world do have energy pulse weapons that are used to destroy electrical systems. Some have speculated that this incident was nothing more than a military exercise with a new type of secret aircraft. However, we do not know of any systems that have the capability to cause the damage that this reported UFO did on that day. Another important thing to know is that given what the UFO did, it could be seen as an act of war, and is at the very least aggressive behavior. All this can be seen in an excellent documentary series called Unidentified. The link will be in the description below. In the series, more details of the event were revealed in a private meeting that happened in Rome, Italy, between Luis Elizondo, who was part of the Pentagon program named ATIP, which was meant to study the UFO/UAP phenomenon, Tom DeLonge, who was actively working with members of the government in a UAP disclosure program, senior members of the Italian military, members of the UN, and of course the Vatican. Some of the members on the Italian side were Clavilio Verduccio, who is part of the Italian Navy and is a scientist, and of course Dr. Roberto Benotti, who you might remember was the first original person who actually got the letters from the anonymous source. Now, some of the details that Clavilio Verduccio revealed sound so much like science fiction, it was hard for me to accept them when I first heard of them. One of the details was that missiles could not be used against the UFO because when they did, they would actually be sent right back to them. However, he said that when the UFO uses their energy beam weapons, they would have to go outside of their stealth mode. It is then that uranium-depleted weapons could be used against them. Another thing he found out was that they could actually be seen under a certain frequency. Now, using this same frequency, you could also use it to provide a radio beacon that could attract them or call them, essentially communicating to them that you understand their technology. In the end, Luis Elizondo and his team would come together in an information sharing agreement with the Italian government at the unclassified level that would be part of a global effort to try to actually understand this phenomenon. The story of UFO/UAP acting in a hostile manner unfortunately isn't an isolated incident. In fact, a similar story took place in Colares, Brazil between 1977 and 1978. Now, the events that unfolded would be much darker than the ones that happened on the island of Sicily. The short version of the story is that the local fishermen would see glowing lights above the ocean right off the coast. However, the lights would begin to come closer in the following days and eventually begin to harass the local population by burning people's skin with what only can be described as rays of lights. People would also wake up with strange puncture wounds on their skin and continue to have terrifying encounters with UFOs. At this point, they would begin to have watchmen. However, this effort proved to be futile, as there was one recorded incident of a man pointing a shotgun at the UFO, and upon pulling the trigger, he found out that no shot was fired or could be fired. Now, when the town doctor heard about all these stories, she was at first skeptical. However, she would later have her own close encounter, which would make her a believer of what was going on around town. Eventually, here too, the military would have to get involved with the help of the Brazilian Air Force and even some members of the US government. They too, skeptical of the claims, would come down and have their own terrifying encounters with the UFOs. In fact, one of their members would have an encounter of the third kind in the middle of the night, in which a tall being appeared and spoke to him. The story of Colares is a big one, not only because of its claims, but because of how heavily documented each incident was. There is said to be actual film of the UFOs. Many have said that this is probably one of the best cases for UFOs, however, very few people know about it or have even paid attention to it. Now, a great documentary can be found here on YouTube covering the events, and I implore you to go watch it, as it is very well researched. The link will be in the description below.